Helen of Troy. The price of beauty. The world knew her as the woman who launched 1,000 ships. They whispered her name with reverence and resentment, the embodiment of a war that spanned decades. But Helen was more than the legend told by poets. She was a woman who bore the weight of a destiny she never chose. As the ruins of Troy smoldered beneath an unforgiving sky, Helen walked through its remains, the scent of burnt wood and dust clinging to her skin. She had stood at the center of a war fought over her. Powerful men had died in their pursuit of something they could never truly possess. But now, with the city in ashes, Helen felt only emptiness. Her return to Sparta would be inevitable, but she did not dream of it. She knew what awaited her: judgment, resentment, whispers in the corridors of her homeland. She had once been a queen, but now she was a specter of war, a symbol of destruction. Desperate to reclaim a sense of self, Helen turned away from the path back to Greece. Instead, she set sail toward unknown lands, toward a future where she was not merely an object of desire, but a woman seeking her own fate. Her journey led her through cities untouched by the Trojan War, where her name was not weighed down by history. There, she met women whose lives had been shaped by choices that were not their own: priestesses bound to their temples, queens silenced beneath the power of kings, daughters raised to be traded like silver. Helen listened to their stories, and for the first time, she found purpose. She became a voice for those who had none, sharing her tale not as a lament, but as a warning, that beauty should never be mistaken for weakness, and that a woman's fate should never be determined by the desires of others. Her travels shaped a new legacy, one not tied to war but to wisdom. The poets who once sung of her face began to tell of her strength. Helen of Troy, the woman who was once a prize, became a symbol of resilience. And so, under the light of a waning moon, Helen stood on the shores of a foreign land, watching the waves stretch toward the horizon. She had been a pawn in the games of gods and kings, but here, she was something more, a woman who had reclaimed her own story. The aftermath of their confrontation with Aphrodite. The winds carried the echoes of battle away, leaving behind a world forever altered. Helen, Andromeda, and Medusa had stood against a goddess, and though Aphrodite had not been defeated, she had been humbled, forced to recognize that beauty was not hers to command, nor could she control its meaning. As the goddesses withdrew to Olympus, the mortal realm stirred with change. Helen's reckoning. Returning to Sparta was inevitable, but Helen was no longer the woman she once was. The halls of the palace felt smaller, the whispers of servants sharper than blades. Men still spoke of her as the face that launched 1,000 ships. But now, she saw the truth. She was never just a prize to be won, nor a curse upon nations. Determined to rewrite her legacy, Helen refused to be a passive queen. She spoke openly of the war, of its cost, and of the pain of being reduced to an object of desire rather than a person with thoughts, fears, and agency. In time, her wisdom became sought after by rulers and philosophers alike. The poets who once sang of her beauty began to write of her mind, her strength. And so, Helen's name endured, but not as the catalyst of war, but as the woman who rose above it. Andromeda's journey across lands. While Helen reclaimed her name, Andromeda set forth on a different path. She had stared into the eyes of gods and monsters alike, and she emerged with an unbreakable will. She traveled across the world, visiting lands where women were treated as possessions, where beauty was worshipped and feared in equal measure. She did not carry a sword or wield a kingdom's power, but her words held more force than any weapon. Wherever she went, women listened. They heard tales of the goddess they defied, of beauty that was no longer a throne to be fought over, but a gift to embrace in their own way. Kings and priests marveled at her presence, but Andromeda was no longer bound to celestial whims. She was free, and she used that freedom to uplift others, to teach that beauty, strength, and wisdom could coexist without fear. Medusa's redemption. For Medusa, the aftermath was more personal. She had been cursed, tormented, turned into a creature of legend meant only to inspire fear. But now, she was something else, something greater. She returned to the temple where her fate had been decided, standing before the priestesses who once feared her. They flinched at first, but she did not lower her gaze. She did not hide. "I was wronged," she told them, her voice steady, unwavering. "Not because I was weak, but because I was feared. The temple did not cast her out. Instead, the priestesses, one by one, lowered their heads, not in terror, but in reverence. Medusa was no longer a monster. She was a protector. In time, her legend changed. No longer was she the cursed one, the horror whispered in the dark. Instead, she became a symbol of survival, of power reclaimed. Women who had been cast aside, who had been wounded, wronged, and forgotten, sought refuge under her watchful gaze. Medusa, once feared, became the guardian of those the gods had abandoned. Aphrodite watches from Olympus. Though she had not been defeated, Aphrodite knew the truth. Her dominion over beauty was no longer absolute. The mortals no longer bowed blindly to her will. They had rewritten her influence with their own strength. And so, she sat upon her throne in Olympus, watching as Helen rose, Andromeda guided, and Medusa reclaimed her power. Perhaps beauty was more than divine perfection. Perhaps mortals understood it better than even the gods. And though she did not interfere, Aphrodite could not deny the change stirring within her own heart. The ripple effects. Across the mortal realm, temples of Aphrodite begin to shift. Once, Aphrodite's temples stood as monuments to unattainable perfection, where worshippers prayed to be granted divine beauty, favor in love, and influence over others. But after the confrontation, a quiet change begins. The priestesses, once devoted solely to Aphrodite, start acknowledging the stories of Helen, Andromeda, and Medusa. Scribes carve new hymns, ones that do not praise beauty alone, but honor the resilience of those who have suffered because of it. Statues of Aphrodite, once depicted as the sole ruler of beauty, now stand alongside figures of Helen, Andromeda, and even Medusa, marking a shift in perception. Some worshippers still cling to old beliefs, seeking Aphrodite's favor. But others come to the temples not to beg for beauty, but to ask for wisdom, strength, and self-acceptance. The goddess, watching from Olympus, does not interfere. Perhaps even she senses that change is inevitable. A shift in storytelling and legends poets, always eager for grand tales, begin rewriting myths. Once they sang only of Aphrodite's splendor, of Helen's cursed beauty, of Medusa's monstrous fate. But now, the songs evolve. Helen's name is no longer whispered as the woman who caused a war, but as the queen who defied fate and reclaimed her own identity. Her story becomes a lesson about resilience, about how beauty alone should never be blamed for the downfall of nations. Medusa, once feared, is now spoken of with reverence. Some stories paint her as a guardian, a protector of those cast aside by society. Others depict her as a tragic heroine, wronged by divine vanity, but never broken by it. Andromeda's legend spreads beyond her rescue by Perseus. She is remembered not as a maiden chained to the rocks, but as a leader, a woman who saw beyond divine whims and guided others toward freedom. In distant lands, girls are named after her, their parents believing her strength to be a blessing rather than her beauty. Women across Greece change how they see themselves. Before, beauty was something to be feared and revered, a weapon, a curse, a divine favor that could elevate or ruin lives. Now, women across Greece begin questioning that belief. Those who had once felt powerless in their beauty now hold their heads higher, realizing that their worth is not dictated by gods or men. Mothers tell their daughters the stories of Helen, Andromeda, and Medusa, not to warn them of their fates, but to inspire them to shape their own. Some women, previously devoted to Aphrodite's image of beauty, abandon their desperate prayers for divine favor and instead seek wisdom, courage, and independence. They no longer believe they must fit Aphrodite's standards to be loved, admired, or respected. The power that once belonged solely to the goddess begins to fragment, spreading among mortals instead. Aphrodite's silent watch from Olympus. From her throne, Aphrodite watches the mortal world shift in ways she never anticipated. Her temples still stand, her name still spoken, but no longer as the unrivaled ruler of beauty. She does not lash out. She does not undo what has been done. Perhaps, in some way, she understands. She was always feared for her power over beauty, but now something new has replaced fear, an acknowledgement that beauty is more than divine perfection. And though she remains a goddess, Aphrodite knows she has been humbled.